The reluctant rescuer. The repair drone chirped an alert as Marco Reeves sealed the crack in the fuel line. He wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a smear of grease across his weathered face. 48 hours of continuous work in the bowels of this derelict freighter, and he was finally done. "There you go, you heap of junk," he muttered, patting the metal wall. Good for another decade of hauling garbage across the sector. Marco wasn't a people person. He preferred the honest simplicity of broken machinery to the complications of human interaction. Out here on the fringes of settled space, he built a reputation as the go-to engineer for jobs too difficult, too dangerous, or too damn weird for the fleet technicians. His modified vessel, the workshop, was part mobile repair bay, part home, and entirely his. The comms unit on his wrist pinged, displaying a message for the payment transfer. Another job completed, another satisfied customer he'd never have to meet face to face. Just how he liked it. Marco was halfway back to his ship when the distress beacon hit. It wasn't on any standard emergency frequency. This was something older, stranger, operating on a wavelength that shouldn't even work across interstellar distances. Yet somehow it had found him. "Analyze signal origin," he commanded his ship's AI as he stepped through the airlock. "Signal originates from the Vestron Nebula, approximately 3 light days from current position," replied the cool, feminine voice of his AI companion, Sarah. "Warning: the Vestron Nebula contains high concentrations of reflective particulate matter. Navigation will be hazardous." Marco rubbed his chin, feeling the 3-day stubble. "Any registered vessels reporting distress in that sector?" "Negative. Signal does not match any known registry pattern." That was unusual. Most distress calls included identification codes, position data, damage reports, the works. This was just a pure, unmodulated signal, a simple plea. "Help." What's the closest Union vessel that could respond? The UES Dauntless. Estimated arrival time: 26 standard days. Marco sighed. "And how long would it take us?" "Approximately 14 hours at maximum safe speed." He stared at the nebula's coordinates floating on the display. The sensible choice was to log the anomaly and continue on his way. Unregistered ships operating in restricted zones weren't his problem. But something about the signal's simplicity tugged at him. "Set course for the signal's origin," he finally said, "and run a full diagnostic on our repair systems. I have a feeling we're going to need them." As the workshop adjusted its heading, Marco settled into his pilot's chair, watching the stars blur as they accelerated. The nebula grew from a distant smudge to a vast, swirling cloud of purple and blue gases. Hidden within its beauty were pockets of radiation, debris fields, and micrometeorite storms, a repair engineer's nightmare. "Signal source located," Sarah announced after hours of careful navigation. "Unusual vessel configuration detected." On the view screen, Marco saw it, and immediately understood why Sarah called it unusual. The ship resembled nothing he'd ever encountered. Organic curves instead of industrial angles, a hull that seemed to pulse with faint bioluminescence, and absolutely no visible propulsion system. It drifted within the nebula, occasional flickers of energy dancing across its surface. Life signs. 2 humanoid beings detected. Atmosphere within acceptable parameters for human boarding. Marco gathered his tools, strapped on his utility belt, and checked his sidearm. Not that he expected trouble, but 20 years of working alone in deep space had taught him to prepare for anything. The docking procedure was surprisingly straightforward. Despite its alien design, the vessel had a compatible airlock system. As the pressure equalized, Marco couldn't shake the sensation that the ship was examining him as much as he was examining it. He stepped through the airlock into a corridor that defied conventional shipbuilding logic. The walls curved organically, illuminated by strips of light that seemed to flow like liquid. The air carried a faint scent of ozone and something else, something floral and alien. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing strangely in the curved passage. "I received your distress signal." No response came, but the lighting in the corridor intensified, creating a path forward. Marco followed, noting the unusual material beneath his boots, not metal or composite, but something that yielded slightly with each step, as if alive. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that could only be the ship's command center. Unlike the utilitarian bridges of human vessels, this space featured a central platform surrounded by what appeared to be living consoles, displays formed from light rather than physical screens. Standing before one of these consoles were two figures. Marco stopped in his tracks. They were unmistakably twins, tall, slender beings with luminescent pale blue skin and large almond-shaped eyes that caught the light like opals. Their hair, if it could be called that, moved with gentle undulation, resembling silver-white tendrils that responded to unseen currents. Each wore a form-fitting garment that seemed woven from light itself. What struck Marco most wasn't their alien appearance but their expressions, identical looks of hopeful relief. "You came," one of them said, her voice melodic and perfectly understandable despite the obvious anatomical differences in their speech organs. "We feared no one would hear us." "I'm Marco Reeves," he replied, keeping his distance. "Engineer. I picked up your distress call. What's the nature of your emergency?" The twins exchanged a glance, a look that contained volumes of unspoken communication. "I am Naira," said the one who had spoken first. "This is my sister, Kyra. Our vessel, the Luminara, is dying." Kyra stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful. "We have tried to heal her, but the damage is beyond our capabilities. We need someone who understands the physical aspects of repair." Marco raised an eyebrow. "Your ship needs healing." "The Luminara is not merely a vessel," Naira explained. "She is alive, conscious in ways your ships are not, but she has suffered damage to her core systems, what you might call her heart." Marco had encountered semi-organic ships before, experimental Union vessels that incorporated living components, but nothing like this. A fully sentient ship was the stuff of theoretical papers and science fiction. "Can you show me the damage?" he asked, professional curiosity overriding his usual caution. Kyra nodded and gestured toward a pulsing section of the wall. As they approached, the wall became transparent, revealing a chamber containing what appeared to be a massive crystalline structure. Parts of the crystal were dark, while others flickered weakly. "This is the Luminara's core consciousness," Kyra explained. "These dark sections represent damaged neural pathways. Without them, she cannot maintain full awareness or control her essential functions." Marco studied the crystal, mentally cataloging the damage patterns. "And what caused this?" Again, that communicative glance between the twins. "A passage through an anomaly," Naira said after a pause. "A distortion in spacetime that we did not anticipate." Marco sensed the evasion but didn't press. He'd learned long ago that clients often had secrets, reasons they preferred independent contractors over official repair facilities. As long as he wasn't walking into a trap, their business was their own. "I'll need to analyze the crystal's composition before I attempt any repairs," he said. "And I should warn you, I've never worked on anything like this before." "But you have repaired many vessels," Kyra said, her voice carrying strange certainty. "Vessels others declared irreparable." Marco frowned. "How would you know that?" Naira smiled enigmatically. "The Luminara chose you, Marco Reeves. Of all the signals in the vastness of space, she found yours." A chill ran down Marco's spine. He'd assumed the distress call had been sent on a broad spectrum, picked up by his ship because he happened to be in range. The idea that this alien vessel had specifically targeted him was unsettling. "Let's focus on the technical issues," he said, deliberately ignoring the implications. "I need to bring equipment from my ship, run diagnostics, and develop a repair strategy." The twins nodded in unison. "Of course," Naira said. "We will prepare a suitable workspace for you." As Marco returned to the airlock, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. The twins seemed forthcoming about their ship's condition, Yet there was an undercurrent to their exchanges that suggested deeper motives. Back aboard the workshop, he instructed Sarah to run comprehensive scans of the alien vessel. Analysis complete, Sarah reported. The vessel's outer hull is composed of unknown biomechanical compounds. Internal systems appear to function without conventional power sources. Most notable finding: the vessel exhibits patterns consistent with neural activity. So it really is alive, Marco murmured. In a manner of speaking, Sarah agreed. However, I detect unusual energy signatures surrounding the neural core. These patterns do not appear consistent with damage from spatial anomalies. Marco paused in the middle of gathering his tools. What are you suggesting? Insufficient data for conclusions, Sarah replied. But recommended caution is advised. This vessel's technology exceeds known parameters by several orders of magnitude. Marco considered abandoning the job. He could disengage, report the encounter to Union authorities, and let them handle whatever this was. But something about the twins' desperation felt genuine. And if their ship was truly dying, load the specialized repair equipment, he decided, and keep our engines on standby. Hours later, Marco found himself deep within the Luminara's neural core, surrounded by tools and diagnostic equipment. The twins hovered nearby, watching his every move with those unsettlingly perceptive eyes. The more he studied the crystalline structure, the more Marco realized he was working with technology far beyond human understanding. The neural pathways weren't simple circuits but complex matrices that seemed to exist partially in dimensions he couldn't perceive. Your ship, he finally said, looking up at the twins. It's not just advanced, it's impossible. At least by any principles of engineering I understand. Naira tilted her head. Perhaps it is not engineering as you conceive it. Then what is it? A convergence, Hira answered, of technology and consciousness, of matter and thought. Marco rubbed his temples. That doesn't help me fix it. You cannot approach this as merely a mechanical problem, Naira said gently. The Luminara doesn't need a technician. She needs someone who can see beyond the limitations of conventional thought. Marco stood, frustration mounting. I'm an engineer, not a philosopher. If you wanted someone to commune spiritually with your ship, you called the wrong guy. As he turned to gather his equipment, the crystal pulsed suddenly, a wave of blue light washing over him. With it came a sensation. Not quite a voice, not quite a feeling, but a clear impression. Stay. Marco froze, the hair on his arms standing on end. What was that? The twins exchanged another of their meaningful glances. That, Kyra said softly, was the Luminara. She is asking for your help, Marco Reeves. And she rarely chooses wrongly. Beneath the surface, Marco stared at the pulsing crystal, his mind racing. The sensation of the ship's consciousness brushing against his own had been fleeting but unmistakable, alien yet somehow familiar, like a half-remembered dream. You felt her, Naira observed, her opalescent eyes studying his reaction. That's not possible, Marco said, though his voice lacked conviction. Ships don't communicate directly with human minds. Kyra approached the crystal, her slender fingers hovering just above its surface. The Luminara isn't merely a ship as you understand them. She's a living repository, a guardian of knowledge and memory. Marco watched as ripples of light followed Kyra's movements across the crystal surface. A repository of what exactly? The twins exchanged another of their silent communications before Naira answered. Our civilization, our history, our science, our art, everything that we were. Her voice carried a weight of sadness that transcended species barriers. The Luminara is one of the last vessels of her kind, carrying what remains of a culture that has almost entirely vanished. Marco absorbed this information silently. He'd encountered refugees before, survivors of planetary disasters, war zones, failed colonies, but an entire civilization condensed into a living ship. That was new. And you too. Are you the last of your kind as well? Not the last, Kyra said, but among the few. Our people, the Liriani, were once spread across 17 star systems. Now we exist in scattered enclaves, preserving what we can of our heritage. Marco returned his attention to the damaged crystal. Whatever the ship was, whatever purpose it served, the fact remained that it was failing, and despite the strangeness of the situation, he couldn't simply walk away. "I think I understand the basic architecture now," he said, gesturing toward the dark sections. "These areas aren't just damage, they're isolated. It's like the neural pathways have been deliberately severed." Naira's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, that is an accurate assessment. Which raises the question, how does something like this happen accidentally?" Marco fixed the twins with a level gaze. "You mentioned an anomaly, but neural patterns don't disconnect this precisely from spatial distortion." The lighting in the chamber dimmed slightly, creating deeper shadows. Marco wasn't sure if it was his imagination, but the ship itself seemed to tense around them. "The truth is more complicated," Kyra admitted after a long pause. "The Luminara was attacked." "By whom?" "Those who fear what we preserve," Naira said. "Those who believe certain knowledge should remain lost." Before Marco could press further, a violent tremor shook the chamber. The crystal flared with alarming intensity, crimson spreading through the blue like blood in water. "What's happening?" Marco demanded, steadying himself against a console. "Cascade failure," Kyra explained, her calm demeanor cracking slightly. "The damage is accelerating." Marco's diagnostic equipment confirmed her assessment. The isolation of the neural pathways was causing a feedback loop, putting increasing strain on the functional portions of the core. At this rate, the entire system would collapse within hours. "I need to stabilize it," he decided, "but I'll need components from my ship." "There's no time," Naira said urgently. "The Luminara can provide what you need." She pressed her palm against a section of wall, which rippled and produced a compartment containing crystalline objects of various shapes and sizes. "These are neural conduits," she explained. "They can bridge the damaged pathways temporarily." Marco examined one of the crystals. It hummed with energy, warm against his fingertips. "And I'm supposed to know how to use these because—" "You don't need to know," Kyra said simply. "You need to listen." Before Marco could object to this decidedly non-technical approach, the ship trembled again. A section of the core darkened completely, and he heard, felt, a cry of pain that existed somewhere between sound and emotion. "Fine," he muttered, gathering the crystalline conduits. "But if this kills me, I'm going to be seriously annoyed." Working primarily on instinct, Marco began placing the conduits at junctions between healthy and damaged sections of the core. Each time he positioned one, the crystal responded, sometimes with approval, sometimes directing him elsewhere with pulses of light or subtle vibrations. It was the strangest repair job he'd ever undertaken, more like participating in a conversation than executing a technical procedure. Hours blended together as he worked, guided by a combination of engineering logic and the ship's own feedback. The twins remained nearby, occasionally offering clarification, but mostly watching in silent fascination as Marco developed an increasingly fluid rapport with the Luminara's consciousness. Finally, as he placed the last conduit, the core stabilized. The erratic pulses smoothed into a steady rhythm, and the crimson tinge receded from the crystal's surface. Marco stepped back, exhausted but satisfied. That should hold, at least temporarily. But it's not a permanent solution. The conduits are bridging the gaps, not healing them. "It is enough," Naira said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "You have given us time." Marco collapsed into a seat that formed obligingly from the floor. "Time for what exactly? You still haven't told me what happened to your ship or why you specifically called for my help." The twins sat across from him, their movements synchronized in a way that would have been eerie if he hadn't already accepted the strangeness of the situation. "The attack on the Luminara was not random," Kyra began. "We were targeted by those who call themselves the Purifiers, a faction that believes ancient technology should remain buried. Our people once possessed knowledge that allowed us to bridge the gap between organic and synthetic consciousness. Naira continued. The Luminara is a product of that knowledge, not built, but grown and awakened. Marco looked around at the living walls of the ship, and the purifiers want to destroy this technology. Why? Fear, Kyra said simply. Fear of what such consciousness might become. Fear of beings that are neither fully machine nor fully alive. The Luminara contains the complete templates for creating more vessels like herself. Naira added. The purifiers believe such knowledge is too dangerous to exist. Marco frowned. So why not destroy the ship completely? Why damage it in this specific way? Because they don't want to destroy the knowledge, Kyra explained. They want to control it. The attack was designed to sever the Luminara's self-awareness while leaving her data intact. A lobotomy, Marco said grimly. Precisely. Naira's gaze was solemn. They would remake her as a simple database, a repository without will or memory. Marco stood, pacing the organic floor. And you needed me because the Luminara has defenses against such attacks, Kyra said. When she detected the purifier's presence, she executed an emergency protocol, dispersing aspects of her consciousness throughout her secondary systems to protect them. But in doing so, she lost the ability to reintegrate those fragments. Naira continued. We can communicate with her, sense her pain, but we cannot rebuild the neural architecture needed to restore her fully. And you thought I could? Marco asked incredulously. The Luminara did, Kyra said. She sensed in you a particular quality, a way of thinking that bridges intuition and technical understanding. Marco recalled the ship's touch on his mind, that strange sensation of recognition. She's been in my head this whole time, hasn't she? Not precisely, Naira said. But she has been listening, learning how you approach problems. A thought occurred to Marco. The repairs we just made, they weren't just stabilizing her systems. They were creating a framework for something else. Kyra smiled, the expression transforming her alien features. You understand more quickly than we anticipated. Yes, the conduits you place are forming a new integration pathway, one that will allow the Luminara to reclaim her fragmented consciousness. As if confirming her words, the crystal core pulsed with renewed vigor. The lights throughout the chamber brightened, and the walls seemed to inhale, expanding slightly before settling back. She's waking up, Marco realized. The sensation that followed was unlike anything he had experienced, a presence unfurling in the chamber around them. Vast and ancient yet newborn in its awakening, it wasn't intrusive as he had feared. Rather, it felt like standing in a room where someone had just turned on a light, revealing dimensions previously hidden in shadow. Gratitude, came the impression, not a voice, but an unmistakable communication directed toward him. Marco looked to the twins, whose expressions reflected a mixture of relief and joy. You're welcome, he said aloud, unsure if vocalization was necessary, but feeling the need to respond somehow. Now you understand why we could not simply seek help from conventional engineers, Naira said. The Luminara needed someone who could work with her, not merely on her. Marco nodded slowly. So what happens now? Your ship is stabilizing, but those purifiers might still be looking for you. Now, Kyra said, we must complete the healing. The conduits provide a temporary framework, but true recovery requires more. Let me guess, Marco said dryly. It requires me. The twins exchanged another of their silent communications. The Luminara has formed a connection with you, Naira acknowledged. Through that connection, she can rebuild what was lost, but only if you are willing. Marco considered the implications. He'd come here expecting a straightforward repair job. Well, as straightforward as anything could be in deep space. Instead, he'd found himself entangled with an alien consciousness, caught in a conflict he barely understood. The sensible choice would be to wish them well and return to his solitary existence. Yet something held him here, a curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper that he wasn't ready to name. What exactly would this healing involve? He asked cautiously. A deeper connection, Kyra explained. A temporary melding of consciousness that would allow the Luminara to use your neural patterns as a template for reconstructing her own. That sounds invasive. It is intimate, Naira corrected, but not harmful. The Luminara would never damage a consciousness that helped restore her own. Marco rubbed his face, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. I need time to think about this. The twins nodded in unison. Of course, Kyra said. Rest. The Luminara will prepare suitable accommodations. As if on cue, a section of wall rippled and formed an archway leading to a small chamber. Inside, Marco found something resembling a bed, a platform that adjusted to his body's contours as he cautiously lowered himself onto it. Despite his intention to merely rest briefly while considering his options, fatigue overwhelmed him. His last conscious thought was that the ceiling above him seemed to be showing him the stars outside, not as a view screen would display them, but as if the ship was sharing her own perception of the cosmos. It was, he had to admit, a beautiful way to fall asleep. Choice among stars. Marco awoke to alarm klaxons. The peaceful chamber had transformed. The walls now pulsed with urgent crimson light, and the ship trembled beneath him. He was on his feet instantly, instincts honed by years of emergency repairs kicking in. What's happening? He called out, rushing toward the core chamber. He found the twins there, their movements quick and precise as they interfaced with the ship's living systems. The crystal core flickered erratically, its recently stabilized patterns threatening to collapse again. We are not alone, Naira answered without looking up. A purifier vessel has located us. Marco's mind raced. How? We're deep in the nebula. Most detection systems would be useless here. They have been tracking the Luminara's neural signature, Kyra explained. As she awakens, she becomes more visible to their specialized sensors. Through the transparent sections of the ship's hull, Marco could see a dark vessel approaching. All angular lines and matte surfaces, the antithesis of the Luminara's organic beauty. It moved with deliberate purpose, like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. Can we run? Marco asked. The Luminara's propulsion systems are still compromised, Naira said. We cannot outpace them. And we cannot fight, Kyra added grimly. The Luminara was never designed as a weapon. Marco thought quickly. What about the nebula? Can we use it somehow? The twins exchanged a glance, then Naira nodded. Perhaps. The particulate matter affects their sensors as well as ours. Then we need a distraction, Marco decided. Something to confuse their tracking systems long enough for the Luminara to hide deeper in the nebula. He rushed back to his equipment, mind racing through possibilities. Among his repair tools was a set of emergency beacons, small devices designed to emit distress signals for stranded engineers. With modifications, they could serve a different purpose. I need to return to my ship, he told the twins. I have an idea, but I'll need components from the workshop. There isn't time, Kyra protested. Their vessel will be within weapon range in minutes. Then patch me into your communication system, Marco insisted. I need to talk to Sarah. The wall near him rippled, forming what appeared to be an interface panel. Sarah, Marco called once the connection was established. Execute emergency protocol Sigma 9. Target approaching vessel and initiate on my mark. Acknowledged, came Sarah's calm voice. Warning, emergency protocol Sigma 9 will deplete 60% of our reserve power cells. Understood. Stand by. Marco turned to the twins. When I give the signal, have the Luminara dive deeper into that pocket of dense particulate matter to the port side. What are you planning? Naira asked. A very old trick. Marco replied with a grim smile. Sarah is going to create multiple phantom signatures, false images of the workshop that will appear and disappear at different points around the nebula. Meanwhile, she'll launch a spread of modified repair drones, each carrying a neural pattern emitter programmed to mimic the Luminara's signature. Understanding dawned in Kyra's eyes. A shell game. Exactly. They won't know which signature to follow. The purifier vessel drew closer, its weapon systems visibly charging. Time had run out. Now, Sarah, Marco commanded. Outside, the workshop sprang to life, deploying a swarm of drones that scattered in all directions while simultaneously projecting multiple ghost images of itself. At the same moment, the Luminara plunged into the densest part of the nebula, her bioluminescent hull dimming to near invisibility. The purifier vessel hesitated, its sensors suddenly confronted with multiple targets where there had been only two. After a moment of confusion, it fired on one of the phantom images, the energy beam passing harmlessly through the illusion. "It's working," Naira reported, monitoring the enemy ship through the Luminara's perception. "They're attempting to track the drone signatures." For tense minutes, they watched as the purifier vessel pursued false targets through the nebula, growing increasingly erratic in its movements. Eventually, it fired upon several drones in rapid succession, destroying the decoys. "They'll realize the deception soon," Marco warned. "We need a more permanent solution." As if in response to his words, the crystal core pulsed with sudden intensity. Marco felt rather than heard the Luminara's communication, an urgent request, a proposed course of action that unfolded in his mind like a technical schematic. "She has an idea," he told the twins, "but it will require completing the neural integration immediately." The twins' expressions showed both hope and concern. "If you join with her consciousness now, in this state of emergency," Naira began. "The connection would be accelerated," Kyra finished. "Deeper than anticipated. There would be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Marco demanded. "A permanent bond," Naira said softly. "The Luminara would always be part of you, as you would be part of her." Marco looked out at the nebula, where the purifier vessel was methodically eliminating the remaining drones. Soon, it would resume its search for the Luminara. And this time, it would not be fooled. "Will it save the ship? Will it save you?" "Yes," the twins answered in unison. Marco took a deep breath. "Then let's do it." They led him to a chamber adjacent to the core, a small space where the walls pulsed with the same rhythm as the crystal heart of the ship. In the center was a recess that seemed designed for a human body. "Lie here," Naira instructed. "The Luminara will do the rest." As Marco positioned himself in the recess, the material beneath him shifted, forming a perfect cradle for his body. The walls around him began to glow with increasing intensity. "What should I expect?" he asked, a tremor of apprehension in his voice. "Openness," Kyra said simply. "Let her in, Marco Reeves. Trust her as she trusts you." Marco closed his eyes as the light enveloped him. For a moment, there was nothing. Then sensation flooded his awareness. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, like suddenly gaining new senses he had no reference for. He perceived the nebula around them, not as a visual image, but as a complex field of forces and particles. He felt the purifier vessel as a discordant note in that field, harsh and intrusive. Most astonishingly, he felt the Luminara herself, not as a ship but as a presence, a consciousness vast and intricate, with depths he could barely comprehend. And she felt him too, his thoughts, his memories, his essence. There was no hiding, no pretense possible in this connection. Together came the thought. Not a word but a concept, rich with meaning and purpose. Marco understood instantly what needed to be done. Through their joined consciousness, he directed the Luminara to reconfigure her damaged systems, channeling energy in ways that would have been impossible before. The ship responded with fluid grace, her systems integrating and healing as Marco's understanding of engineering merged with her innate knowledge of her own being. Outside, the purifier vessel finally spotted them and moved in for the kill. But it was too late. The Luminara, guided by Marco's technical insight and powered by her own renewed consciousness, released a pulse of energy that rippled through the nebula. The pulse wasn't a weapon in the conventional sense. Instead, it temporarily altered the properties of the particulate matter surrounding the purifier vessel, causing it to solidify around their hull like rapidly hardening resin. The enemy ship struggled against its sudden confinement, engines straining, weapons firing uselessly into the cocoon forming around it. Within minutes, it was completely immobilized, not destroyed, but trapped until help could arrive or its life support failed. Slowly, gently, the Luminara withdrew from Marco's mind, leaving him gasping on the platform. The twins were at his side immediately, helping him to sit up. That was, he began, but words failed him. How could he describe the experience of briefly sharing consciousness with a being so different yet so complementary to his own? "You succeeded," Naira said, joy evident in her voice. "The Luminara is whole again." Indeed, Marco could feel the difference in the ship around them. The corridors seemed more vibrant, the lights steadier, the subtle background hum more harmonious. More than that, he sensed a lingering connection, fainter than during their merger, but undeniably present. "The purifier vessel?" he asked. "Contained," Kyra confirmed. "We have sent a message to others of our kind. They will come to ensure the purifiers are dealt with justly." Marco nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "And now, what happens to you?" "To the Luminara." The twins exchanged one of their communicative glances, but this time Marco sensed the undertones of their silent exchange. Concern, hope, a question neither wanted to ask directly. "We continue our journey," Naira said finally. "The Luminara carries knowledge too important to lose, and there are places among the stars where it will be safe from those who fear it." "I see," Marco said, feeling a strange hollow sensation at the thought of their departure. "You could come with us," Kyra said suddenly, the words coming in a rush as if she'd been holding them back. "The Luminara, she wishes it. As do we." Marco stared at them in surprise. "Come with you. Leave everything behind." "What would you be leaving, Marco Reeves?" Naira asked gently. "You have lived alone among the stars, moving from one repair to another. With us, with the Luminara, you would have purpose, connection, a home," Kyra added softly. Marco looked around at the living ship that had briefly shared his consciousness, at the twin beings who had trusted him with their most precious possession. They were right about his solitary existence. He had chosen it deliberately, finding comfort in the simplicity of machinery and the absence of complicated relationships. But something had changed. The connection he had formed with the Luminara had awakened something in him, a longing he hadn't acknowledged, a capacity for belonging he had denied himself. "I would need to retrieve my ship," he said finally. "I can't just abandon the workshop." The twins' eyes widened in surprise, then shone with unmistakable joy.